Rejoicing in the Lord versus rejoicing in our accomplishments. Let's begin with a simple but profound truth. Rejoicing in the Lord is different from rejoicing in the accomplishments we make in the name of the Lord. These are not one and the same. One is centered on God, the other, if we are not careful, may end up centered on us. Rejoicing in the Lord means finding joy in who God is, His presence, His grace, His nearness, and His faithfulness. This joy is not tied to circumstances. It doesn't depend on visible results, financial blessings, or ministry success. It is an act of worship, often born in the midst of suffering, confusion, or even failure. It says, though everything else falls away, I have God, and that is enough. On the other hand, rejoicing in the accomplishments, even spiritual ones, tends to be tied to what we can see: the size of a crowd, the success of a sermon, the building of a church, the growth of a ministry, or the miracles performed. These may begin as celebrations of what God has done, but they can subtly become celebrations of what we have done. We may start to build our identity around outcomes. We may confuse the gifts of God with God Himself. The Apostle Paul never said, rejoice in your ministry, or he never wrote, rejoice in your impact. What he said plainly and repeatedly was, rejoice in the Lord always. Philippians 4:4. That is the foundation. Paul didn't just preach this idea, he lived it. First, rejoicing in the Lord, not results. In Philippians 4:11 to 12, Paul writes, I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances, whether well fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. What a radical joy that is, right? It's not anchored to outcomes, good or bad. It's anchored to Christ's sufficiency. Paul doesn't say, I rejoice because my church planting strategy worked or because thousands came to faith. He says, I rejoice because I have Christ and Christ is enough. Second, he rejoices in their generosity, but not for himself. In verse 17, he writes, not that I desire your gifts. What I desire is that more be credited to your account. Even when people give him gifts, Paul isn't focused on how it benefits him. He's rejoicing in the spiritual fruit that is growing in them. His joy is not in the thing itself, but in what God is doing through it. And third, he directs glory back to God's provision. He makes it clear, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Philippians 4:13. And my God will meet all your needs according to his riches in glory. Philippians 4:19. These are not boasts of his own strength, but confessions of deep dependency. Paul is showing us where true joy and confidence come from, not the fruit, but the root. If that is how Paul is preaching, how does this matter for preachers and leaders today? In fact, this is where it becomes especially relevant for pastors, church planters, evangelists, and ministry workers today. We live in a world where Christian success is often measured in metrics. How many followers? How big is your church? How many baptisms? How viral was your sermon? And so we begin to equate God's blessings with visible outcomes, such as a packed hall means God is with me. A growing budget means God is moving. A viral video means God has favored my ministry. But here is the danger. If our joy is always tied to external fruit, we will not know how to rejoice when things are dry, or when people walk away, or when we were rejected, misunderstood, or feel abandoned. And in fact, when it comes to Christian ministry, those kind of moments are not unusual. They are part of real biblical ministry. So, joy that's dependent on fruit will wither when the fruit is not visible. But joy that's rooted in the Lord will thrive even in the wilderness. Moreover, if we see Jesus and his warnings on misplaced rejoicing, in Luke 10:20, he says to his disciples, "Do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven." The disciples had just come back from a ministry trip with powerful stories, deliverance, miracles, authority over demons. They were excited. But Jesus gently redirects their excitement. He tells them, "Don't anchor your joy in power, results, or ministry success. Rejoice in something deeper and eternal, that you belong to God." This is the same posture Paul teaches and lives in Philippians 4. So let's return to the key statement. Rejoicing in the Lord is not the same as rejoicing in what we do for the Lord. This is not just theology, it's a practical compass for the soul. The first is rooted in relationship, the second is often rooted in recognition. The first leads to humility and peace, the second can lead to spiritual pride and burnout. The first sustains us in weakness, the second may deceive us in success. If we don't learn to differentiate between these two joys, we may find ourselves rejoicing in the name of the Lord, but not in the Lord Himself. So, a better testimony would be a church culture where we celebrate the quiet faithfulness of an unknown servant as much as the visible charisma of a famous preacher. And moreover, what if we learn to say from the heart, even if I have no crowd, no platform, no visible fruit, yet I will rejoice in the Lord, for He is near. This is the kind of testimony that honors Christ. This is the kind of joy that cannot be stolen. This is what Paul meant when he said, "Rejoice in the Lord always." So here is the bottom line. True Christian joy is not the applause of men for the works we do in God's name. It is the peace of knowing we belong to Christ. Even when no one sees, no one praises, and no visible results come. That kind of joy is secure. That kind of joy is holy. That kind of joy is our witness in a world obsessed with success. So, my dear brothers and sisters, rejoice in the Lord, not in your fruit, not in your fame, or not in your feelings, but in the unchanging, faithful, near presence of the Lord always.